That's amazing. All right, Marshall, it's you and me, buddy. This is my forewarning here. I will be pointing a lot to Marshall to advance slides. So if you think I'm being very directive to you and I say, you said, I might not be talking about you, I might just be talking about Marshall. Go ahead and advance it too. There we go. Just like that. Okay, guys, here we go. We're going to start. This is going to be good. All right, so here's the deal. We are in the third of this going through Genesis. We're going to be in Genesis for about the next 12, 13, 14 weeks, something like that. But we're going to be flying through it. We're going to be going rather quickly through it. So there's going to be points where I'm just going to pick this verse to move through the narrative. But I'm going to miss some of the genealogies, and I know that many of you love genealogies, the begats and so begat so and so. So I'm encouraging to read as many of the begats on your own as you would like to. I'll hit a couple of them just to kind of give the flow, but for time, I figured we're gonna move. Today, a lot of it's going to be talking about things like purity. As we're going through here, we're going to kind of hit purity, which of course means that this is how it ought to be, the oughts. And then, of course, because things fall out of whack, right? So then the oughts become wases because we mess up, and then the oughts become wases, and it's like, oh, then God has to deal with it, has to clean the decks, has to punish. But even in His judgment, the neat thing is that we see His character of love and mercy. So even as He judges, He's merciful. And that's one of those things. I'm so often grateful that God doesn't just zap me the first time I sin, right? So the fact that He holds back on judgment to give the time to repent, a time to ask for forgiveness is in itself a picture of mercy. All right. I kind of broke this down into a couple acts again on our narrative. And really, this is really interesting because we're going to be following the kind of the descendants of Adam through Seth. We're going to see the descendants of Adam through Cain. We're going to hit all of that. But really, the neat thing is we're going to be going through 4. And I love this. This is a $50 word. I want to throw it out there. It's actually even an archaeology word. The word is Antediluvian. Have you ever heard that? Now you guys can sound college educated. Antediluvian means ante is before the deluge, before the flood. See, now you'll have that answer on Jeopardy. Okay, Antediluvian. We're going to hit some mysteries. And what's neat is that, like we talked about in the first sermon that we did today, the first time we went through this, we talked about how really Moses is blowing through history really quick. And he's going through a lot of stuff. If he wanted to talk about a couple thousand years of history in one book, it wouldn't take one book, right? So he's gonna hit and go. He's deliberately picking stories to kind of move the flow along for his narrative. And his narrative, of course, is the telling of a greater gospel, which, again, thank God, it leads to Jesus Christ, and then His forgiveness, and then ultimately today. Boom! All right, in honor of Comic-Con, I used Comic Sans. So I thought it was funny. So here you go. So meanwhile, back in Eden, right? Now I should say back in Eden because there was a little bit of confusion before, and there's probably going to be more confusion then. Eden is not the garden. Eden is the big area. It's the land. So within Eden, God created a garden, right? And we call the Garden of Eden. So when Adam and his family is driven out of the Garden of Eden, they're driven out of the garden, out of the Holy of Holy area, and then they live in Eden. So it's kind of the name for the land. All right, so then like we said, when last we left Cain. What did we talk about last week about Cain and Abel? Cain killed Abel, right? So we followed through that. Okay, go ahead, Marshall. Picking up verse 12, this is the punishment that God is dealing out to Cain for the murder. So here it goes. No longer will the ground yield good crops for you, no matter how hard you work. From now on, you will be a homeless wanderer on the earth. Cain replied to the Lord, my punishment is too great for me to bear. You have banished me from the land and from your presence. You have made me a homeless wanderer. Anyone who finds me will kill me. And the Lord replies, no, I will give a sevenfold punishment to anyone who kills you. Then the Lord put a mark on Cain to warn anyone who might try to kill him. So Cain left the Lord's presence and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain had sexual relations with his wife, became pregnant, and gave... Oh, by the way, I should say that that's not Cain that became pregnant. That's his wife. Figured I'd clarify, just in case you were wondering. Became pregnant and gave birth to Enoch. Okay. Boom. Look at that. Now let me tell you this. Cain and Abel. We have a tendency of when we go this... do you guys know what a melodrama is? A melodrama is almost like it's a telling of a story, almost like a cartoon where it sucks out all the kind of little bit of it and turns it as broad. So like Dudley Do-Right was a melodrama, where the good guy is all super good. Here I come to save the day. He's all on this side, and then the bad guy's like oil can Harry or whatever. It's like I'll get you, right? That sort of thing. That's a melodrama. Our tendency sometimes is to talk like it's a melodrama. So when we look at Adam and Eve, we even sometimes tell, or not Adam and Eve, but Cain and Abel, we even tell that in a melodrama format, where we talk about how Abel was, good, he's fantastic, and Cain is bad. So when I mention Cain, it's almost like in a melodrama if I said, every time the villain comes on, everybody goes, boo, hiss. So it's almost like I should say, boo, Cain, and you guys go, boo, hiss, right? But is that how it's written in the Bible? The reality is Cain is a real person. And here's a 3D kind of HD realization when looking at this. Listen, Cain has a much more intimate relationship with God than so often we do. Right? God was talking to him face to face, giving him a message saying, Cain, sin's desiring to own you. Don't let it. Cain is talking to him. Even in his judgment after he sinned, what's happened is that God said, here's your punishment. And Cain is crying for mercy. God, give me mercy, isn't he? So when we look at Cain's walk, let's look at some patterns here, because we're going to see these. This is Cain, this is further. You're going to see Cain sinned, right? Does he mess up? Yeah. Is Cain a murderer? Yes. Yes. So are those of us who have hated our brother, by the way. But we won't talk about that. Jesus said, right? Cain is messed up. His mess up has to be punished. Does it have to be punished? Does sin have to be punished? Absolutely. All sin is punished. Mercy is cried for and mercy is granted. More than that, Cain gets a new life. Because what we're going to see is, if we read the genealogy, you're going to see that Cain goes and he has sexual relations with his wife. She became pregnant. They have a kid, Enoch. And then they found a city. And then his son has a son, and they do this, and they son, and so on and so on. And you follow, and you see a whole stream of, there's kind of a new life is granted. Now, is it the same life he would have had he not sinned? No. The scarring that we take in sin is very real. Adam had sexual relations, NLT, just sexual relations everywhere. All right, Adam had sexual, this is where they use the euphemism, when they do the King James at least, where they say, and he knew his wife. Yeah. Adam had sexual relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to another son. His name was Seth, for she said, God has granted to me another son in place of Abel. And then whom Cain killed. When Seth grew up, he had a son whose name was Enosh. At this time, the people began to worship the Lord by his name. Does That's when they're calling on Yahweh. So you're seeing that right there, early on. And you see kind of this whole thing. So good stuff is happening. As bad stuff happens, is sin increasing in the world? Sin is increasing in the world. We're going to see it. But also we see that in response to that, people are crying for God. That sort of thing's still happening. Continuing on, this is written in the account, this is beginning in chapter 5. This is written into the account of the descendants of Adam. When God created other human beings, He made them like Himself. He created them male and female, and He blessed them and called them human. And when Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him, in his very image, and he named him Seth. So let me pause for a second. I told you we're going to hit some Antediluvian mysteries. And it is right now, and you guys aren't so excited probably about Comic-Con as I am, who's a little bit of a nerd, and who has sons who's looking forward to Marvel movies and stuff, and Star Wars, and we're always hoping that something's going to be leaked or announced, especially after Avengers 3. We're hoping for a little bit of good news and some hope or mercy coming out, right? So we thought, well, I'll tell you, one of the things that Comic-Con is, it's a convention in San Diego where people come up who have a big interest in comic books or whatever, and they talk about all sorts of mysteries in the comics, like whether or not Superman could really beat up, I don't know, trying to think of something like Captain Marvel or something, right? Isn't that that's the kind of thing that they would do that? Well, I can tell you, these antediluvian mysteries that we're going to hit, I think some of them are fun. I think there are things that at Christian conventions we can sit down and we can say, what do you think Moses meant by when he said something? I think that's okay. Now, I'm going to deal with them. I'm going to hit some of the big ones here because right here in this period of prehistory, some big four ones are going to be bam, bam, bam. And I'll talk about them because, if you're talking to somebody about Jesus and you're talking to somebody about the gospel story, sometimes they focus on these things. They're like, well, what about this? Well, I'll give you some answers. So the first one, the mystery of early people. Where'd they get their wives? How many of you ever heard that? I just said at the very beginning of the first one, this Cain knew his wife. Where did he get his wife? Well, I'll hit the big ones. I'll hit the big, some big general theories. And I will tell you that about these theories, the Bible is not clear if it's one of these specifically. It could be. But it also doesn't prohibit one of these. So I'll just throw it out there. The first one is that they're brothers and sisters. Yeah. Right? Now people will say all kinds of things to make it feel less yucky. It was brought up that somebody said, hey, listen, sin hadn't affected DNA quite the same way at the very beginning, so that's why people are longer, and getting busy with your sister is okay. Other people have said, hey, you don't see the prohibition against having sex with your sister until Moses writes it. Pretty soon, right? I don't know. I don't like that one. Can God do it? Can God? Sure, I suppose so. But I'm just hanging it up. God is not less God if it happens that way. But yeah, brothers and sisters, yeah. The second one, here's another option. Let me just throw it out there. What you see is, and there's a verse in chapter 6 where it says, when men became increasing numbers and daughters were born to them. Almost sounding like daughters start getting born later on. So there's a way of viewing it and saying, hey, what's happening is that Cain gets his wife the same way Adam got his wife, which is God made one for him. Made special women. Here's your wife. Come on in, right? Could it be that? Could be. Another one, and this is probably the one I like better because there's some verses that kind of bounce on it. There are 3 places where it says God could have made people. So what we're talking about Adam's line, because Adam's line leads to who? Jesus. But there's a chance, there are several places where God is making people that doesn't necessarily are part of that line. So the first place, Genesis 1:1, right? I talked about it 2 weeks ago. Genesis 1:1 said God created the heavens and the earth, right? That meant everything. Are people part of everything? And remember, if, as what I suggested the last week and before, was that when we're talking about Eden, when we're talking about establishment of Eden, setting out the garden, it's to make a place for God to interact with humanity, to tell the gospel story. That's what's happening. But really, he's setting out the land, the promised land, not necessarily the globe. So every place that we're going to read the word earth, we think, I say earth, you think of a blue globe. When Moses thought earth, he wasn't writing earth, he was writing land. And for him, most of it was talking about the promised land. So could it have been the whole planet? It could have been, but it doesn't have to be. Because the land is special. So Genesis 1:1, he creates all things. Also, we see at the very beginning, on day 6, it says that God created men and women in our image, right? He says, let us create man and woman. And he created them male and female. Day 6, right? He says that. It says that day 6 in chapter 1. And he says it was very good. And he rested. And then it said, oh, and then God created Adam special. Well, that's interesting. Adam's created in chapter 2. So we have chapter 1. And then there's another place, of course, chapter 5 was what we just read, where it says, and when God made humans. So it could be that we're talking about Adam's line, and then we're talking about, well, God just peopled the planet. I will say this, do you think Moses thought it was important where they got their wives? Which is why we have the little, we can say the conjecture at our Christian conventions. Christicon? No. All right, continue on. After the birth of Seth, Adam lived another 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. And then Seth was 105 years old. He was the father of Enosh. The birth of Enosh, Seth lived another 807 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Seth lived 912 years, and then he died, etc., etc. This is where you start seeing the genealogies. And then this person had this person, this person had this person. They lived this many years, they had more sons and daughters than this. And it goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on, right? Continue on. And then you're going to fall all the way down to the next one, and we're going to kind of, this is in the middle of that list. When Enoch was 65 years old, he was the father of Methuselah. That's everybody's, oh, I know that name. After the birth of Methuselah, Enoch lived in close fellowship with God for another 300 years. He had other sons and daughters. Enoch was 365 years old, walking in close fellowship with God. Then one day he disappeared because God took him. Is that an interesting mystery? I love that. I think the King James says, and he walked with God, and he was no more, or something like that. It's like, oh! It's one of those things where, Moses, writing 2,000 years of history, or whatever it was, just as he's like, writing it down quickly, he's doing this sort of thing, he's just putting that little blurb in there, and he just rolls on, and I'm almost like, Moses! You gotta open that up, expand it a little bit. But he doesn't, because it's not important to the gospel. The things that are important to the gospel are things that are going to play a role coming up right in advance. What happened to Enoch? Well, there's some conjecture. The first one is it went straight to heaven, do not pass go. Do not collect $200, straight to heaven. That's kind of cool, right? Who does that sound like? Elijah. Right? What happens to Elijah? Right? Isn't that what happens? A chariot comes down. He takes, and he flies up. That's good, right? That's a neat thing. So the idea is that when we see with Enoch, is we see almost the same picture of his intimacy with God. Does this now? I put down this. So here's the conjecture. The conjecture is at the closing of the book, where things are start going out of control there in the book of Revelation. They're not out of control, but there's a lot of judgment that's happening. Now, one thing that happens is two prophets come. Two prophets from old show up and start prophesying. And it has long been believed that one of those prophets was Elijah, and the other one could possibly then be Enoch. So Enoch was just waiting in heaven to go and do that. I love that. I think that there's a neat bow on it. I think it's interesting that there are two people in the Bible who don't seem to suffer death that way, that seem to get taken out. So you get an idea that in the narrative that they're hanging out waiting for something. It's like that's going to be important later in the story, right? So it makes kind of sense that way. The other one, and I'll throw it out there, is maybe that Moses was using a euphemism for dead that we just don't understand now. And Moses was being creative. Does that ever happen in the Bible? It does. Sometimes there's euphemisms that our language changes on it. We don't understand. Nervous because I'm videotaping this, and some of the people that are watching might get sad if I say this, but well, I'll say it because it's true. A good example is the word tongues. In 1611, if I said I spoke other languages, what would I say?
Speak many tongues.
I speak in many tongues. That's what they would use. When it says in every tribe and tongue will sing, that makes sense. So 1611, tongues means languages. And then what happens is the gift of tongues is given in Acts, right, to the people in the upper room. And then they go out and they speak. And what do they speak in? They speak in tongues of all the people that are out there. So by 1900, do we use the tongues to mean languages? No. So what happens is we get people that come in and look at the scripture and says, hey, God gives this gift of tongues. Maybe there's something else, something special, and they look for something even bigger. So yeah, sometimes idioms die in a language. So that it is possible that that's it. Now, do you think it's important for Moses? I don't think it's necessarily important for Moses. I do think that maybe it's a hidden. I think the prophet is the prophet that shows up in the end. So in which case he's laying out something that John's going to use when he writes Revelation. All right, go ahead. Okay, so this is an overview of the of this all the way down to the genealogy, all the way down to Noah. When Lamech was 182 years old, he became the father of a son. Lamech named his son Noah, for he said that may he bring us relief from our work and from the painful labor of farming this ground that the Lord has cursed. Now here's part of that, kind of going back into that language changing. In the original language, some of these names were very clear to mean stuff. So if I was to really translate this to our ear, so if it was the same to our ear as it was to the hearers of Moses' Genesis the first time, it would sound something like this. So this cat named Suffering, when he was 182 years old, he was the father of a son, and Suffering named his son Relief. For he said, may he bring us relief. Does that make sense? And you'll see the clues in it, like so oftentimes, like Eve will say, hey, and God has given me a son, and I'll name him Seth because God has appointed one for me. Because Seth means appointed. So there's some clues to us when we look at the Hebrew, when they say, oh, and that's why we're calling it that. So some of those names are prophetic. Now, this is a small rabbit to chase. I'm not going to go really deep into it. Go ahead and advance it once. So generally, there's some, most of these names, there's a pretty solid understanding of the meanings of the names. Probably 6 of them are that way. 4 of them are a little bit hazy, but it's something like this. Adam means man. Seth means appointed. Enosh, mortal. Canaan means sorrow. Sorrow. Mahalalel means the blessed God. Jared means shall come down. Enoch means teaching. Methuselah means his death will bring. Lamech means despairing. Noah, comfort and rest. A lot of people say, well, gee, that's a Bible quote. They said, man appointed, right? So mortal sorrow. It's a picture of Jesus coming down. The Blessed One shall come down, teaching that his death will bring, comfort and rest to the despairing. And as they like to drop the mic there. Now I will tell you this, that while that may or may not be a hidden hologram within the Bible, if you just read the general message of the gospel, that's the general message of the gospel. So sometimes people are like, I'm digging deep down and I found this inner meaning. Well, what is the big meaning? Well, the big meaning is God sent Jesus down to die for your sin. Oh, that's good. Well, see, that's what I found. Well, just look at it. You also don't have to dig quite that hard. Now it came about that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, the daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nonetheless, his days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth at those days, and also the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, and those were the mighty men of old, men of great renown, men of renown. Okay, questions? How many questions are linked in all that? So that leads us to the mystery of Nephilim. Oh, wait, let me back it up, just like this. Okay, so when I say sons of God, who is that? Who have you heard that is?
Well, I heard angels.
You've heard angels? Has anybody else heard angels? Is this the first time you've seen this? Yeah, this is one of those kind of exciting conjecturing ones. Angels. Some people have said it's angels, and they're having children with men, and then the children of men and angels intermixing have been of great renown, also called the Nephilim, or sometimes it's also translated as giants. Now, in the narrative, are there giants in the narrative that's coming? Yes. They're going to be going into the land, and the land is filled with giants. Children of this intermixing. So, advance with it. So here are the theories about the Nephilim, just to kind of throw it out there. So they're going to play a role. There's a small role, but here's some possibilities. The first is that the sons of God means angels, and that the daughters of men are humans. And it's that. Well, maybe more than that. There's other ideas. At first, that we're talking about the descendants of Adam, because in the genealogy in the New Testament, Adam is called, when you follow it, and he was the son of so-and-so, and he was the son of so-and-so, and it finally gets to Adam, and says Adam was the son of, Adam is the son of God. So what they say is all the descendants, whether or not they're Cain or Seth's descendants, all branch from Adam. So when it's talking about the sons of God, that's who we're talking about. And then any other human being, folks that were outside the land, came from outside the land. So we're talking about intermingling of those things. Does that make sense? That's a possibility. The next one is that we're talking about the sons of God. They're God because they are following Seth's line. And they say, well, Seth was good, so all of his kids are good. So those are the sons of God. And then Cain was bad, so all of his sons are bad. So that's humanity. Seth is sons of God, daughters, and they're talking about intermingling of those tribes. Now, is that going to play a part in the role coming up? If it's that would count too. Because what are the Israelites being told as they're going into the Canaanite land? Don't intermingle with these people, right? So there's potential for that. The other one, and I like this one too. The righteous are the sons of God, because our righteousness is found in our faith in the Lord. Our faith in the Lord, because of our faith in Jesus Christ, we are adopted into the family, right? And Paul says, and then we are therefore called children of God, sons and daughters of God. So what we could be talking about is a warning here against intermingling with non-believers. Believers getting married to non-believers. Is that an easy walk to make? It's not an easy walk to make. It happens. People do it, but it's a struggle. So we see all of those things. Now this one, question I'd ask here is, does Moses think it's important? I would say the intermingling part is important. Whether or not we're talking about righteous or and rebellious, or whether or not we're talking about the descendants of Seth, the descendants of Cain, kind of like the children of Israel going with the Canaanites, or whether or not we're talking about Adam's line, all of that intermingling, it does play a role. It's a cautionary tale of what's coming forward. The Lord observed that the extent of the human wickedness of the earth, and that he saw that everything that they thought or imagined was consistently and totally evil. So the Lord was sorry that he ever made them and put them on earth. It broke his heart, and the Lord said, I'll wipe out the human race I've created from the face of the earth. Yes, I will destroy all living things, all the people, the large animals, the small animals, the scurry on the ground, and even the birds of the sky. I am sorry I have ever made them. But Noah found favor with the Lord. Now here's my question. This is as we're coming into this fourth Antediluvian mystery, the flood. I will say this. I keep reading earth. The word is eretz, which is land. So he's talking about everybody that's marred the land, that he's set out, this established land. He's cleaning the land. All the things that are going to be offered are going to be cleaned because he's cleansing it all. Act 2, coming into the, cue the flood. This is the account of Noah and his family. Noah was a righteous man, the only blameless person to live on the earth at the time. He walked in close fellowship with God. Noah was the father of 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now God saw that the earth had become corrupt and filled with violence. God observed all the corruption of the world, and everyone on the earth was corrupt. So God said to Noah, I've decided to destroy all living creatures, and they have filled the earth, filled the land with violence. I will wipe them all out, all along the land. Why is it important? Because he's made the land as a stage where he's going to tell the gospel story, and he's got to clear it. What is Moses getting his people ready to do is to go into the promised land, to clear the land and get it ready to the world. And what's Moses going to be warning them? Hey, when you're disobedient, you too will be driven from the land. God will redeem you, forgive you, bring you back. And then the righteous one will come. So you see that kind of, that repeat. We see that God's judgment, he's cleaning house, he's got to clean the church, he's wiping out the slate. Build a large boat with cypress wood, waterproof and tar from inside and out. Construct the decks and stalls throughout the interior. Continue on a couple verses down. I'll destroy every living thing that breathes, everything in the land, everything on the earth will die. But I will confirm my covenant with you. So enter the boat, you and your wives and your sons and their wives. So God's cleaning house, but even in his cleaning house, he's showing his mercy, right? Because he's saving Noah. Bring a pair of every kind of animal, and male and female, into the boat with you, to keep them alive during the flood. Pairs of every kind of bird, every kind of animal, and every kind of small animal that scurries on the ground will come to you to be kept alive. And be sure to take on board enough food for your family and all the animals. So God did everything exactly as God had commanded them. And now I'm going to mess you guys up. Because you have all, how many of you, maybe I should ask it this way, has anyone not heard the story of Noah before? Everybody's heard the story of Noah. I'm gonna break it for you here for a second by asking a question. Why were there animals on the boat? You know, that Silverstein poem says that there's no unicorns because they didn't make the boat, right? So the only way the animals could have survived is making the boat. Is that true? How did the animals get the land in the first place? God created them. Can God not create anymore?
He can create.
Is that making you scratch your head a little bit? You're like, why were they? Why? Wait a second, hold on, you're right. God doesn't need man for those animals to get if he created the animals in the first place, he doesn't need man to take care of them. The animals on the boat, not for the boat, not for the animals' sake, but for Noah's sake. To give him something to do on the boat. What's he supposed to do on the boat? Keep the animals alive. Because what was the job of the man in the garden? To tend the garden, to care for the animals. So even in the midst of judgment, God is giving the chores, right, to Noah, to remind Noah that the judgment will end. giraffes again, and green alligators, and long-necked geese, and humpty-back camels. Right? Because I see them. When everything was ready, the Lord said to Noah, go into the boat with all of your family, and along with it, the people of, for among all the people of the earth, or of the land, I see that you alone are righteous. Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, of each animal that I have approved of eating and for sacrifice, and take 1 pair of the others. Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. Because what's expected? What's expected is that he was going to be eating and sacrificing. So what is it given Adam? What is it given Noah? He's given him the same kind of thing, so he can do worship services. He can work. He can do this. And then the great thing, I love that verse. And Noah did everything the Lord commanded him. So really, God's given him hope even in the storm. Mercy for Noah. Noah was 600 years old when the flood covered the earth. And he went into the boat to escape the flood, and he and his wife and his sons and their wives, who were all with them, various kinds of animals. After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth. Noah was 600 years old, and on the 17th day, the 2nd month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell, the mighty torrents of the land, and the rain continued to fall for 40 days and 48 nights. Now, I'll just say it just because a lot of people talk about it. Was the flood local or global? The word repeatedly is eretz, repeatedly land. Is the flood supernatural? Absolutely. It looks like it wipes out the land. Now, if you wipe out the land, is it going to affect South America? It could. Does it have to? I'll tell you that in Mesopotamia, there's a flood layer all throughout the stuff. I'll tell you another interesting thing is globally, there are flood myths everywhere. And tribes in South America, I think it's the Iroquois in America had a flood myth. You got some island people, Polynesian folks had flood. It's just amazing. So leave it for what it is. Continue to read on. Everything that breathed and lived on dry land, on the land died. God wiped out everything, every living thing on earth, people, animals, livestock, and small animals that scurried along the ground, birds in the sky. All were destroyed, and the only people who survived were Noah and those who were with him in the boat. And the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days. God remembered Noah. I got foreshadowing things to come. God's wiping out everything, setting it up, and doing that. It's the same sort of thing when God tells Joshua to go in and wipe out everything in this area. Or when he tells David to just sort of things. Sometimes he tells him to go in and don't even take an animal, right? Cleanse everything. Because this is a foreshadowing of cleansing that's going to be coming in the land. 2 more months went by, and the last of the earth was dry. And then God said, Noah, leave the boat, all of you, you and your wives, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Release all the animals, the birds, the livestock, the small animals that scurry along the ground, so they would be fruitful and multiply throughout the earth. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he sacrificed burnt offerings, the animals, and the birds that had been approved for this purpose. And the Lord was pleased with the aroma of the sacrifice and said to him, I will never again curse the ground because of the human race and everything that they think, and because everything that they think or imagine is bent toward evil from childhood. I will never again destroy all living things. Then God blessed Noah and sons, and he told them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth. What does it sound like? The very beginning. All the animals of the earth and all the birds of the sky and the small animals that will scurry on the ground and all the fish in the sea will look at you with fear and terror, and I will place them in your power. What does it sound like? Stewardship, right? Same sort of picture. I have given them for your food, just as I have given you grain and vegetables. You must never eat any meat that has lifeblood in it. Why? Because blood's special. And I will require the blood of anyone who takes another's life. If a wild animal kills a person, it must die, and anyone who murders a fellow human must die. If anyone takes a human life, that person's life will be taken by human hands. God made human beings, for God made human beings in His image. Now be fruitful and multiply and repopulate the earth. Do you see that what we have is the same reestablishment? So God's cleared the land and He started over again. It's similar to garden, or it's similar to Adam in the garden. It's similar to the humans after the garden. It's similar to what's going to happen to the children of Israel when they enter the land. It's that pattern. And it's similar to us. See, because really when it comes down to us, and pardon my damage to grammar, but I like to do that sometimes. What we have right here is we have the was-is, right? The oughts, the will-be's. So God has established how things are supposed to, how the relationships we're supposed to have things. You know, that's the was-is. That's how it starts out. But you know what? Do we live up to them? No, we fail. Even like Cain, we fail. And that sin causes marks, causes scarring, and needs to be punished. Punishment, hopefully, on the cross, right? So it leads to the questions for us, promises of justice in the beginning. For us, is there a wrong in your heart like Cain that God is responding to because He has to? He's a righteous God. But are you like Cain at a point where you need to turn and cry for mercy? Is that where you're at? The good news is that God's merciful, and He provides mercy. He paid for all death, or He paid for all sin on the cross. You too can have it. Is there a pain or an injury or a hurt in your past that God can help recover? Because everything is a recovery. We see that recovery. We see that even in the first murder recorded in the Bible, that person has a life after that. God shows mercy to the first murderer in the Bible. Think about that. See, what's funny is so often we'll get involved in all the discussions of, hey, well, this theory, well, what about this? Is it global flood? Is it local flood? Is this? Do they marry their sisters? What did they do? You know, we have all of these things where we miss the main story is man is screwed up. God has to judge the pain of sin. He has to judge it because He's holy, but He offers mercy, and He offers peace, and He offers a new beginning. Is it time for you to start to